My wife became CO immediately after her father died. Exactly 5 days later, she called me into her office and fired me. She told me I wasn't executive material and that she needed to trim the fat. She thought she was finally the queen of the castle. But there was one tiny detail she missed in the paperwork. She didn't know that while she inherited the title, I secretly owned 69% of the company. Monday morning is going to be absolutely fun. Welcome back to Inspiration Seeker. If you love stories about sweet revenge, hidden secrets, and arrogant people getting a reality check, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, if you held the power to destroy someone who betrayed you, would you do it immediately or would you wait for the perfect moment? Let's get into the story. To everyone at Sterling Logistics, I was just Liam, the operations manager. I was the guy you call when a shipment was stuck in customs in Ohio, or when the fleet's software glitched at 2 a.m. I wore off-the-rack suits, drove a 5-year-old sedan, and kept my head down. In the high-stakes corporate world of Chicago, I was invisible. That was exactly how I liked it. It was also exactly how my wife, Vanessa, preferred it. Vanessa was the crown princess of the company. She was the daughter of the founder, Robert Sterling. She was sharp, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying to the interns. To her, I wasn't really a husband. I was more like a convenient accessory. I was safe. I was predictable. I was the man who made sure her coffee was hot, and her schedule was clear. She loved to remind me, usually in front of her high society friends, that she had married down for love, implying that I was lucky just to be breathing the same air-conditioned air as the Sterling family. She didn't know the truth. Nobody did, except for her father, Robert. See, 10 years ago, Sterling Logistics wasn't the titan of industry it is today. It was bleeding cash. Robert had made some bad investments, and the banks were circling like sharks. The company was days away from bankruptcy. Robert was too proud to ask for help publicly, but he was desperate. That's when I stepped in. I wasn't just an operations manager back then. I was a silent investor with a massive inheritance from a tech patent I sold in my 20s. I quietly infused millions into company, clearing the debts and restructuring the entire logistics model. Robert wanted to make me a partner publicly, but I refused. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted to build. So we signed a secret agreement. Robert would remain the face of the company, the CEO, and the owner on paper to the public. But the voting stock, the controlling interest, that belonged to a holding company solely owned by me. I held 69% of the company. Robert held the rest. For a decade, I let Robert take the credit, and I let Vanessa treat me like the help, knowing that if push ever came to shove, I held the nuclear codes. I never thought I'd have to use them. But the atmosphere in the house changed the moment Robert's health began to decline. I could see the ambition rising in Vanessa's eyes. She wasn't mourning a father. She was waiting for a throne. And I was just an obstacle in her path. The funeral was held at one of those old, stone cathedrals in downtown Chicago, the kind that smells like incense and old money. It was a cold, gray Tuesday, fitting for the mood, or at least the mood everyone should have had. Robert was a good man, a titan of the industry who actually cared about his people. The pews were packed with employees, competitors, and city officials. I stood in the front row next to Vanessa, playing the role of the supportive husband. I reached out to hold her hand, tried to offer some genuine comfort. She pulled her hand away as if I had burned her. She didn't even look at me. She just hissed, "Not now, Liam. You're wrinkling my silk." I watched her work the room. To the public, she was the grieving daughter, dabbing dry eyes with a handkerchief. But I knew her tells. I could see the way her eyes darted around the room, assessing who was there, calculating net worths and alliances. She wasn't mourning. She was networking. She was consolidating power over her father's casket. It was chilling to watch. The man hadn't even been buried yet, and she was already measuring the drapes for his office. Then he showed up, Chad. Chad was Vanessa's friend from college. He was a guy who described himself as an entrepreneur, but had never actually run a profitable business in his life. He wore a suit that was too tight and sunglasses that were too expensive. He shouldn't have been in the family section. Yet there he was, sliding into the pew right on the other side of Vanessa, and the change in her was instant. The Ice Queen act melted. She leaned into him, whispering and nodding. They looked like a couple plotting a coup, not two people mourning a death. After the service, at the wake, the shift became undeniable. I tried to get Vanessa to eat something, to take a moment to breathe. She looked right through me. "I don't have time for food, Liam," she snapped, loud enough for half the board of directors to hear. "Someone has to step up now that Daddy is gone. Clearly, I'm the only one with a vision to do it." She started talking about modernization and trimming the fat while holding a glass of champagne. She was dismissing her father's legacy, the legacy I had secretly saved, before the flowers on his grave had even wilted. I stood by the bar, nursing a scotch, watching my wife and Chad laugh in the corner. I realized then that my grief was solitary, and I realized that whatever protection Robert provided me was gone. I was alone in the lion's den, and the lions were hungry. The transition of power wasn't a handover. It was a hostile takeover from within. By Wednesday morning, the corporate lawyers had finished the preliminary reading of the will. Vanessa inherited all of Robert's personal assets and his direct stock in Sterling Logistics. Because Robert had always acted as the face of the company, everyone, the legal team, the board, and especially Vanessa, operated under the assumption that she had just inherited the controlling vote. They didn't dig deep enough into the corporate bylaws to see the distinction between Class A and Class B shares. They didn't see the shadow corporation that actually held the reins. They didn't see me. So, Vanessa was appointed interim CEO. And let me tell you, the word interim was just a formality to her. She treated it like a coronation. Her attitude shifted overnight. It was like a switch had been flipped. The moment she sat in her father's chair, the grieving daughter vanished, replaced by a tyrant with a credit card. Her first order of business wasn't to reassure the clients or meet with the department heads to ensure stability. No, her first order of business was to gut Robert's office. "It smells like old men and cigars in here," she announced, crinkling her nose as she walked through the executive suite. She ordered an immediate, high-priority renovation. She demanded the classic mahogany paneling be ripped out and replaced with cold, sterile glass and white marble. She ordered a custom Italian desk that cost more than most of our warehouse workers made in a year. While the company was in a fragile transition period, she was burning capital on aesthetics. It was a slap in the face to everyone who had respected her father, but nobody dared to speak up. They were all terrified of the new queen. At home, the dynamic became even colder. I came home that Wednesday evening to find my pillows and clothes moved to the guest bedroom. When I asked her about it, she didn't even look up from her iPad. "I need my sleep, Liam," she said dismissively. "Being a CEO is exhausting. I can't have you tossing and turning next to me. You understand, right?" She wasn't asking for my understanding. She was giving me an order. I was being demoted in my own marriage, pushed to the sidelines just like I was at work. She started treating me less like a husband and more like an inconvenient roommate. She couldn't legally evict yet. She stopped wearing her wedding ring, claiming it clashed with her new power suits. I watched all of this happen, biting my tongue, letting her dig her hole deeper and deeper. By Thursday morning, the atmosphere at Sterling Logistics had gone from tense to toxic. But the real blow came at the 10 a.m. executive staff meeting. I walked into the conference room, expecting a strategy session on how to handle the market volatility following Robert's death. Instead, I walked into a circus. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, looking every bit the part of the powerful executive, but there was a new chair added right next to hers. And sitting in it, spinning a pen between his fingers with an arrogant smirk, was Chad. "Everyone," Vanessa announced without standing up, "I've decided that this company has been stagnant for too long. We are stuck in the past. To help guide us in the future, I am appointing Chad as our new Chief Visionary Officer, effective immediately." The room went dead silent. The CFO, a woman who had been with us for 20 years, looked like she was about to choke on her water. Chief Visionary Officer wasn't even a real position in our bylaws. It was a made-up title for a made-up man. I couldn't stay silent. I knew Chad's resume. The guy was a walking liability. "Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. With all due respect, Chad's last 3 ventures ended in litigation and bankruptcy. He has 0 experience in global logistics or supply chain management. Is this really the time to be bringing in external consultants with questionable track records? Chad stopped spinning his pen. He didn't answer me. He just looked at Vanessa with a bored expression, like I was a fly buzzing around his head. Vanessa slammed her hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Excuse me, Liam," she glared, her eyes narrowing into slits. "I didn't ask for an opinion from the peanut gallery. You manage the warehouse schedules. You move boxes from point A to point B. That is the extent of your contribution here. Let the adults handle the strategy and the big picture." The humiliation was absolute. My team, people I had trained, people who respected me, looked down at their notepads, too embarrassed to make eye contact. She had just emasculated me in front of the entire leadership team. She reduced 10 years of silent genius down to moving boxes. "Understood," I said quietly. I sat back in my chair, watching Chad whisper something in her ear that made her giggle. They thought I was defeated. They didn't know I was just taking notes for the wrongful termination suit. It was 9:30 p.m. on Thursday. Most of the office lights were off, but I was still at my desk, illuminated by the blue glow of my monitors. I wasn't there because I wanted to be. I was there because I had to clean up a mess. In his first act as Chief Visionary Officer, Chad had rerouted a critical shipment of medical supplies through a cheaper, slower hub to optimize costs. The result was a logistical nightmare that threatened to spoil $500,000 worth of inventory. While Chad was out celebrating his brilliant strategy, I was the one on the phone with dispatchers in Nebraska, manually overriding the system to save the contract. Once the crisis was averted, I sat back and rubbed my eyes. The office was dead silent. I wondered if Vanessa was even home yet, or if she was still out networking. I pulled up the smart home app on my phone to check the security cameras. I usually check just to make sure the alarm was set, but what I saw on the living room feed made my blood run cold. They were there, in my house. Vanessa and Chad were sitting on my leather sofa, drinking a bottle of vintage Cabernet that I had been saving for our 10th anniversary. Their shoes were off, and they looked entirely too comfortable. I turned up the volume on my phone, listening through my earbuds as a high-definition audio picked up their conversation crystal clear. "He's such a drone," Vanessa laughed, swirling the wine in her glass. "Did you see his face in the meeting?" But Vanessa, the litigation, she mimicked my voice in a pathetic, whining tone. Chad chuckled, putting his feet up on the coffee table. My coffee table. "How much longer do we have to deal with him? The guy is a buzzkill." Vanessa took a sip and smiled, a cold, predatory smile I had never seen directed at me before. "Not long, babe. I just need the board to ratify my permanent CEO status on Monday. Once the ink is dry and my position is secure, I'm filing the papers. I'm married down, Chad. I need a power couple dynamic, not a glorified warehouse manager. I'm going to cut him loose with nothing." I sat there in the dark office, watching my wife plot the destruction of my life on a 5-inch screen. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone against the wall. A strange sense of calm washed over me. The last shred of guilt I had about what I needed to do evaporated. I tapped the screen and hit save video. Then I backed it up to cloud. Then I backed it up to thumb drive. "You want a power couple?" I whispered to the empty room. "Careful what you wish for." Friday arrived with the heaviness of a judgment day. The office was quiet, but it was the silence of people holding their breath. Everyone knew that Vanessa was looking for heads to roll to assert her dominance, but nobody expected the blade to fall so close to home. The summons came at 11 a.m. via a calendar, invite simply titled Performance Review. It was laughable. I hadn't had a performance review in 10 years, because I was the performance. But I grabbed my jacket, straightened my tie, and walked down the long hallway to the executive suite. When I entered the CEO's office, the air was stifling. Vanessa sat behind her father's massive oak desk, looking small but dangerous. She was wearing a sharp red blazer, a power color. Standing by the window, examining his fingernails, was Chad. He didn't even have the decency to leave the room for a private marital conversation. He was there to enjoy the show. "Sit down, Liam," Vanessa said, not looking up from a file she was pretending to read. I sat. I kept my posture relaxed, my face neutral. "What can I do for you, Vanessa?" She finally looked up, her face composed into a mask of fake corporate sympathy. "Liam, we've been reviewing the org chart with Chad. We're moving the company in a lean, aggressive direction. We need to trim the fat." She paused for effect, waiting for me to beg. I didn't. "Unfortunately," she continued, her voice hardening, "your position as operations manager is redundant. The systems you use are outdated. Chad has proposed an AI-driven logistics model that makes your role obsolete. Furthermore, having my husband in a subordinate role creates a conflict of interest that makes the board uneasy. So, effective immediately, your employment is terminated." She slid a thin manila envelope across the desk. "This is a severance package. It's generous, considering you don't have an employment contract. 2 weeks' pay. We'll need your badge and your laptop before you leave the building." It was clinical. It was cold. She was firing the man who saved the company, the man she slept next to for 7 years, like she was canceling a gym membership. Chad let out a short, sharp laugh from the corner, quickly turning it into a cough. 2 weeks' pay, I repeated, looking at the envelope. "After 10 years of service." "It's standard policy for mid-level management," she said, checking her watch. "Security is waiting outside to escort you. Don't make a scene, Liam. It would be embarrassing for you." She thought she was ending me. She had no idea she was just handing me the ammunition I needed for Monday. Most people in that situation would have exploded. They would have shouted about loyalty, about the years of sacrifice, or about the sheer cruelty of being fired by their spouse 5 days after funeral. Vanessa was bracing for it. I could see her muscles tensing, ready for the drama. She wanted me to make a scene. She wanted me to prove her point, that I was emotional, unstable, and unfit for her new world order. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my own pen. It was a cheap ballpoint, not the Mont Blanc fountain pen she now insisted on using. I opened the folder she had slid across the desk. I scanned the documents quickly. There was buried on page 3 was a strict non-disclosure agreement and a release of claims. If I signed that, I couldn't sue and I couldn't talk. I carefully separated the papers. I took the acknowledgement of termination, the paper that legally proved she was firing me without cause, and signed it with a flourish. Then I took the NDA and the release, folded them neatly, and slid them back across the desk toward her, and signed. "I won't be needing those," I said, my voice dead calm. Vanessa blinked, confused. "You have to sign the full package to get the severance check. Liam, don't be an idiot. You're going to need the money." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. "I think I'll manage, Vanessa, but I have one question before I go. Are you absolutely sure this is the path you want to take? Because once I walk out that door, there is no turning back." She laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Just get out." Security. 2 guards entered. They were guys I knew, guys whose kids' names I knew. They looked ashamed to be there. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," one of them muttered. "It's fine, Mike," I said. I didn't pack a box. I didn't take my stapler or my files. I reached over my desk and picked up a single object, a framed photograph of me and Robert, taken on a fishing trip 5 years ago. It was the only thing in that office that was real. "Goodbye, Vanessa," I said. "I'll see you on Monday." "You're not allowed in the building on Monday," she yelled after me as I walked out. I just smiled. She had no idea. While Vanessa and Chad spent the weekend doing a victory lap, I went into total radio silence. According to the grapevine, my loyal contacts in the IT department, the 2 of them were treating the weekend like a massive party. They ordered catering to the executive suite on Saturday. They were already drafting the press release for Monday, announcing the new era of Sterling Logistics. They thought the war was over. They didn't even realize they were dancing on a minefield. I spent my Saturday morning at a greasy spoon diner on the outskirts of Chicago, a place where the coffee tasted like battery acid and nobody asked questions. Sitting across from me was Arthur Henderson. Arthur was 80 years old, wore suspenders, and had been Robert Sterling's personal attorney for 40 years. He was the only other person on earth who knew the true structure of the company. When I told him what happened, he didn't look surprised. He just looked sad. He slowly stirred cream into his coffee and shook his head. Robert feared this might happen, Arthur grumbled, his voice gravelly. He loved that girl, but he knew she had her mother's vanity and none of his grit. "It's time, Arthur," I said, sliding the termination letter across the table. "Initiate the Phoenix Protocol." The Phoenix Protocol was a contingency plan Robert and I had drafted years ago. It was a nuclear option. It was a set of legal bylaws designed to be triggered in the event of a hostile takeover or, in this case, gross incompetence by the public-facing leadership. Arthur pulled a thick binder from his briefcase. He opened it to the page detailing the shareholder structure. "You know what this means, Liam?" he asked, tapping the paper. "Once we file these motions on Monday morning, the facade is gone. You won't be the invisible man anymore. You'll be the target." "I've been a target for 5 days, Arthur," I replied, thinking of the camera footage of Chad in my house. "Now, I won't be the shooter." We spent the next 4 hours drafting the resolutions. We prepared the writs of removal. We notarized the share certificates, proving my 69% ownership. By the time we left the diner, the sun was setting, and I had a briefcase full of dynamite. I went home to an empty house. Vanessa was staying at a hotel to be closer to the office, and slept like a baby. Monday wasn't just going to be a meeting. It was going to be an execution. You might be asking yourself, how is this even possible? How does a wife live with a man for 7 years and not know he owns a majority of her father's company? How did the board of directors miss this? The answer lies in human nature, specifically ego. 10 years ago, when I bailed Robert out, he was terrified of looking weak. In this industry, perception is reality. If word got out that the great Robert Sterling had to be saved by his young son-in-law, the stock price would have tanked, and his reputation would have been shattered. He begged me to keep my involvement completely off the books. So, we set up a structure that was complex, legal, and invisible to the naked eye. We created 2 classes of stock. Class of common stock. These shares paid dividends and held monetary value. This is what Robert held, and this is what Vanessa inherited. It gave her the right to the profits, the fancy cars, and the country club memberships. It made her rich. Class B supervoting shares. These shares held 0 economic value. They paid no dividends. But they carried 100% of the voting power regarding the appointment of the CEO and board members. I purchased all the Class B shares through a blind trust called Janus Holdings. To the outside world, Janus Holdings was just a nameless, faceless entity that rubber-stamped Robert's decisions for a decade. Every year, I signed a proxy allowing Robert to vote on my behalf, keeping the illusion alive that he was in charge. Vanessa saw the bank accounts. She saw the Class A shares in the will. She saw the money. But she never bothered to look at the corporate governance documents. She never asked who Janus Holdings was. She assumed, like all arrogant people do, that money equals power. She was wrong. Money is just money. Control is power. And on Friday, when she fired me, she unwittingly voided the proxy agreement I had with Robert. The moment I was terminated without cause, the voting rights reverted back to the primary holder of Janus Holdings, me. She was walking into that boardroom on Monday thinking she owned the kingdom. She didn't realize she was just a tenant, and the landlord was coming to collect. They say Monday is the worst day of the week. But for the employees at Sterling Logistics, this particular Monday felt less like the start of a work week and more like the beginning of a hostage situation. I wasn't in the building yet. I was parked across the street in my beat-up sedan, sipping coffee and watching the entrance, but my phone was blowing up with texts from the inside. My former assistant, Sarah, was giving me the play-by-play. The atmosphere was grim. The warehouse managers were pacing nervously. The sales team was whispering in huddles, and the morale that Robert had spent 40 years building had evaporated in less than a week. Everyone knew I had been fired, and to them, it was a final signal that the inmates were officially running the asylum. At 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the board meeting was scheduled to start, Vanessa and Chad finally arrived. They didn't come in through the employee entrance or even the main lobby. They pulled up to the curb in a brand-new leased Porsche Cayenne, company expense, no doubt, and handed the keys to the security guard like he was a valet. Sarah texted me. They're walking in now. Chad is wearing sunglasses inside. Vanessa just told the receptionist she's not to be disturbed by peasants today. I watched them strut through the glass doors. They looked like movie stars on a red carpet, completely oblivious to the resentment boiling around them. They were high on their own supply, convinced that today was merely a formality. In their minds, the board meeting was just a rubber stamp. They expected the directors to nod, smile, and hand Vanessa the keys to the kingdom permanently. They spent the next 15 minutes in the CEO's office, likely rehearsing their buzzwords. Synergy, disruption, paradigm shift. They were preparing to sell a vision of the future that was entirely hollow. Meanwhile, the 12 members of the board of directors were filing into the main conference room on the 40th floor. These were serious people, bankers, logistics experts, old friends of Robert. They were already skeptical, but they felt trapped. They thought their hands were tied by the inheritance. At 9:55 a.m., I put my car in park. I grabbed my briefcase, which contained the binder Arthur and I had prepared. I checked my tie in the rearview mirror. Time to go to work, I said to myself. I stepped out into the rain and began the long walk to the front doors. The dead man was walking, but I felt more alive than I had in years. The boardroom on the 40th floor was a sanctuary of silence and serious business. Around a massive oval table sat 12 men and women who controlled the fate of thousands of employees. These were hardened industry veterans, bankers, logistics experts, and old friends of Robert who knew the difference between a profit margin and a pipe dream. They sat with their hands clasped, waiting. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. At 10:07 a.m., the double doors swung open. Vanessa breezed in, not offering an apology for her lateness. She treated the delay like a power move, as if her time was inherently more valuable than theirs. Following closely behind her was Chad, who was carrying nothing but a tablet and an iced latte. He didn't even wear a tie, in a room full of bespoke suits and gray hair. He looked like a tech bro who had wandered into the wrong building. "Good morning, everyone," Vanessa said, taking her seat at the head of the table, her father's seat. It looked too big for her. "Let's keep this brief. I know you all have questions, but Chad and I have a vision that's going to answer all of them." She gestured to Chad, who stood up and tapped his tablet. The projection screen lowered, displaying a slide deck that was all style and no substance. The title read, Sterling 2.0, Disrupting the Now. The old Sterling Logistics is dead. Chad announced, pacing the room like he was giving a TED Talk. We are moving away from traditional freight. Boring, slow, low margin. We are pivoting to an AI-driven, blockchain-integrated delivery ecosystem. The room went dead silent. Finally, George, the chairman of the board and a man who had driven trucks before he owned them, took off his glasses. "Son," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism, "we move steel and grain. We have 4,000 trucks on the road. How exactly does blockchain help us get a shipment from Chicago to Detroit in a snowstorm?" Vanessa cut in before Chad could answer. "You're thinking too small, George. That's the problem with this board. You're obsessed with trucks and routes. We need to focus on brand identity and market sentiment. That's why my first motion as permanent CEO will be to liquidate 20% of the fleet to fund a rebranding campaign." The board members exchanged horrified glances. Liquidating the fleet? It was suicide. It was the dismantling of the company. "Vanessa," George said sternly, "you cannot be serious. That fleet is our backbone. I am the CEO, George." She snapped, her eyes flashing. "And I own the stock. This isn't a debate. It's a notification. Now let's move to the ratification vote so we can get to lunch." They thought they were untouchable. They thought the voting stock in Vanessa's name was a blank check to destroy the company. The tension was so thick you could choke on it. The board looked defeated, ready to raise their hands in a vote they hated, believing they had no choice. That was the exact moment I reached the door. The heavy oak doors didn't creak when I pushed them open, but the sound of the latch clicking echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Every head turned. 12 members of the board, plus Vanessa and Chad, froze in place. I walked in, but I didn't walk in as Liam, the operations manager. I wasn't wearing my usual wrinkled button-down and slacks. I was wearing a bespoke, charcoal gray Italian suit that I hadn't worn since my days in private equity. I walked with a cadence I had suppressed for a decade, the stride of a man who owns a building, not the man who cleans it. The silence lasted for about 3 seconds. Then pandemonium. What the hell are you doing here? Vanessa shrieked, jumping up from her chair. Her face flushed a deep, angry crimson. Security! Get him out of here. This is a private board meeting. He is a disgruntled former employee. Chad stood up too, trying to look imposing, but he just looked confused. Yeah, buddy, you need to leave. You were fired. Friday. Remember? Pack your box and go. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway behind me. It was Mike and his partner, Steve. Vanessa pointed a manicured finger at me. Remove him. Immediately. Or I'll have you both fired too. Mike looked at Vanessa. Then he looked at me. He hesitated. In the 10 years I had worked there, I had asked about Mike's kids every week. I had helped Steve with his mortgage paperwork. When the bank gave him trouble, they knew who I was. They knew the character of the man standing in the room. Mr. Sterling? Mike asked, his voice uncertain. Did you need to leave? I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes locked on Vanessa. It's all right, Mike. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. You boys can wait outside. Mike nodded, stepped back, and closed the door. Vanessa looked like she had been slapped. She had given a direct order, and her own security team had ignored it. She turned to the board, desperate to regain control. This is insane. George, call the police. He's trespassing. I ignored her completely. I walked past the empty chairs, past Chad, who shrank back as I approached, and stopped at the foot of the table, directly opposite Vanessa. I placed my briefcase on the mahogany surface with a heavy thud. I'm not trespassing, Vanessa, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. And I'm not a former employee. I'm the reason everyone at this table still has a job. Vanessa let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. She looked around the room, trying to find an ally, but the board members were staring at me with a mix of confusion and curiosity. The reason we have jobs, she scoffed, crossing her arms. Liam, you're having a breakdown. This is sad. You managed the warehouse. You didn't save anything. That's what your father wanted you to believe, I said calmly, because he knew that if you knew the truth, if you knew where the money actually came from, you would have stopped trying to earn his respect and started waiting for him to die. The room went icy cold. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I clicked the latches on my briefcase. Snap, snap. I pulled out the thick, leather-bound binder that Arthur and I had prepared. I didn't hand it to Vanessa. I slid it down the length of the polished table until it stopped right in front of George, the chairman of the board. Actually, Vanessa, I continued, my voice steady and low. You did fire me as the operations manager on Friday. That is true. I accept that termination. I'll even cash the severance check. But when you fire me, you triggered a specific clause in the family trust, a clause regarding the voting rights of Janus Holdings. George put on his reading glasses. His hands were shaking slightly as he flipped open the binder. He scanned the first page. Then the second. His eyes widened. He looked up at me, then over at Vanessa, then back at me. My God, George whispered. What? Vanessa snapped, her voice rising an octave. What is it? It's a forgery, whatever it is. It's not a forgery, I said. It's the Articles of Incorporation from 10 years ago. You see, Vanessa, you inherited the Class A stock. That gives you the dividends and the money. You're a very rich woman. But you didn't check the bylaws regarding Class B stock. I leaned forward, placing both hands on the table, dominating the space. Class B stock controls the voting rights for the CEO and the board, I explained, locking eyes with her. And as of this morning, I am the sole beneficiary of the Class B trust. I own 69% of the voting stock of Sterling Logistics. You're sitting in my chair. Vanessa snatched the binder from George's hands, tearing a page in the process. She scanned the legal jargon frantically, her eyes darting back and forth, looking for a loophole, a signature missing anything. "This isn't right," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Daddy wouldn't do this. He wouldn't give the company to you. You're nobody." "He didn't give it to me, Vanessa. I corrected her. I bought it. I saved it. And now I'm saving it again." I turned my back on her and addressed the board. The 12 directors were looking at me with new eyes. They weren't looking at a fired operations manager anymore. They were looking at the majority shareholder. They were looking at the boss. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "As the holder of 69% of the voting stock, I am calling for an immediate emergency vote. We have 3 motions on the table." Vanessa tried to interrupt. "You can't do this. I am the CO. Motion number 1, I continued, speaking over her. The immediate removal of Vanessa Sterling as interim CO due to gross incompetence, misappropriation of company funds for personal renovations, and failure to uphold fiduciary duties. I looked at George. He didn't hesitate. He raised his hand. "Seconded." George said, "All in favor?" I asked. Every single hand in the room went up. Even the directors who had been smiling at Vanessa 10 minutes ago voted against her. In the corporate world, loyalty is to the winner, and it was very clear who had won. Motion passed. I said, "Motion number 2, the immediate termination of the consulting contract for the chief visionary officer, Chad, effective immediately. No severance." Chad, who had been trying to shrink into the wallpaper, squeaked, "Hey, wait a minute. We have a contract." "Your contract was signed by an unauthorized executive," I replied coldly. "It's void." All in favor. Again, every hand raised. And finally, motion number 3, I said, finally looking at Vanessa, whose face was now a mask of pure horror. "The appointment of myself, Liam Sterling, as permanent CEO of Sterling Logistics." The hands went up before I even finished the sentence. It was a landslide. It was a massacre. In less than 3 minutes, I had stripped them of everything. Their titles, their power, and their dignity. "The motions carry," I said, closing the briefcase. "Vanessa, Chad, get out of my office." Vanessa didn't scream. She didn't fight. She went into a state of total shock. The reality of the situation hit her like a freight train. In the span of 10 minutes, she had lost her title, her power, and her future. But then, as the realization settled in, she tried one last desperate gambit. She tried to play the wife card. She walked around the table, tears welling up in her eyes, tears that might have actually been real this time. She reached out to grab my arm, her voice trembling. "Liam, honey, please. You can't do this. We're family. It was just the stress of grief talking. I didn't mean to fire you. We can work this out. We can run this company together, just like Daddy would have wanted." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. Then I looked at Chad, who was sweating through his cheap t-shirt. "Family?" I repeated, my voice quiet enough that only she could hear. "Family doesn't bring their ex-boyfriend into my house while I'm working late. Family doesn't plot to divorce me on my own couch." Her face went pale. She pulled her hand back as if she'd been stung. I saw the security footage. "Vanessa," I whispered, leaning in close. "I saw everything. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, is waiting in the lobby with a packet of documents for you. It's a divorce filing, citing infidelity, supported by high-definition video evidence. You're not getting half of my assets. You're not getting alimony. You're getting exactly what you gave me on Friday, nothing." I straightened up and signaled to Mike and Steve. "Escort them out, and make sure they don't take anything that belongs to the company. That includes the laptop, the phone, and the keys to the Porsche." The walk of shame was brutal. The entire office had stopped working to watch. Hundreds of employees lined the glass walls of the hallway as Vanessa and Chad were marched toward the elevators by security. There was no cheering, no applause. Just a heavy, judgmental silence. They were witnessing the fall of a tyrant. I stood at the window of the CEO's office, my office, and watched from 40 stories up. I saw two small figures emerge onto the sidewalk below. I saw the valet take the keys to the Porsche back. I saw them hail a taxi in the rain. I turned back to the room. The board members were still sitting there, looking at me with a mix of respect and fear. The company was safe. The employees were safe. And for the first time in 10 years, I didn't have to hide who I was. I sat down in the big leather chair. It was comfortable. All right, I said, opening the binder to the first page of the real strategy. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get started.